Well, I think we're all concerned about identity and fake ID and how it could be used to benefit a lot of people. And is there any effort to crack down on some of this? Our guest this morning is Brian Zimmer. He's the president of the Coalition for a Secure Driver's License. And he has served as a policy advisor and investigator for the Committee on the Judiciary, U.S. House of Representatives. And he deals with this topic. And Brian, nice to have you with us today.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
We hear you just fine. You're looking good, too.
Well, I'm sorry I couldn't provide you with Skype or any of the others this morning, but we have some construction going in our office, and it wasn't possible to arrange that. But delighted to speak with you this morning.
Yeah, likewise, and we'll get your pretty face in the future. But this is a fascinating topic, and it seems like that this argument is way overdue. How bad is this issue?
Well, we were on the right track for a few years after 9/11. Congress and the 9/11 Commission were highly aware of the problem of not only counterfeit IDs, but people getting driver's licenses and IDs who really weren't eligible for them, in addition to which the need to distinguish between people who are legally here as guests, the people who are citizens, and people who are not here legally. So those are all related issues. The 9/11 terrorists entered legally, but most of them had lost their status. Some actually were losing their status in the days around 9/11 as in terms of their legal residence in the United States. So in the United States, we have no national identity card. We have a passport, which is issued for international travel purposes on a voluntary basis. That is, we don't get one automatically. We have to apply for it. We have to renew it. It's kind of a surrogate national ID, except only about 10% of Americans actually have a passport. So our internal passport, our national identity equivalent, and it's not a national identity card, are the state-issued driver's licenses and state-issued IDs.
Wow.
So that's really what, when we travel to another state, if there's some reason for us to present identification away from our home, we present a driver's license, and people accept that with no question.
Well, you know, this opens up such a huge topic because not only are we concerned about terrorists, we're concerned about those getting into the system for assistance from state government and elsewhere.
Correct. A lot of fraud. There's huge levels of tax fraud associated with counterfeit driver's licenses and with validly issued driver's licenses where insufficient attention has been paid by the Department of Motor Vehicles, the Department of Licensing, to confirming the identity of the person across the counter from them.
What about voting?
Well, that's a related issue. I think, honestly, my work with voting fraud indicates there's probably more absentee manipulation and issues than there are actual imposter fraud in most states. There are definitely proven cases of imposter fraud in Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin. I don't know of any, Washington State, which tends to ignore it. I don't know of any cases like that in Oregon. I mean, I think it's highly localized. Most voter fraud organized locally. It's pretty complicated to have the trouble of usually what people will use if they're fraudulently voting. Imposter cases in Missouri, for example, they had little cards that had their names, but they didn't have any pictures on it. Because as soon as you do that, you're not only engaged in voter fraud, you're engaged in identity fraud. If you get caught, pretty risky.
You know, Brian,
the biggest example of the instance was in the 2000 election, where about 80,000 people were proven after the election to have voted in both New York and New York and Florida, and that was actually determined by them having driver's licenses in both states as well. But since then, as a result of 9/11, and in the case of Florida, election reforms, you can't do that anymore with Florida and New York. That is, only by fraud can you have a driver's license in both states.
Now,
so there have been some reforms since 9/11 that have been desirable. And even in Oregon, there were some major reforms initiated by the governor and the legislature in 2007 when lawful presence was put in, which, among other things, stopped the practice of providing driver's licenses and IDs to illegal aliens.
Wow.
And as you know, that legislature reversed itself and is now involved in a new adventure.
Right. Brian, is it true that some of the Al-Qaeda training manuals deal with this subject and how to obtain one?
Yeah, well, there's only one central Al-Qaeda training manual. It's reproduced in many languages. But there's a whole chapter devoted toward the front of the manual, devoted to disguising your identity and disguising also whether you are a devout Muslim or not. The manual actually goes further than talking about passports and driver's license. It also talks about appearing as though you are not a devout believer. For example, the 9/11 terrorists made a point of going to Las Vegas, partying, etc. They thought that would throw people off the track if they were being followed.
Wow.
So they probably had a good time too, watching strippers in Vegas and other places. But it's part of Al-Qaeda's MO to appear to be sort of a secular Muslim if you're in another country planning, or maybe not even in another country, if you're planning wicked things.
Is there any defined program, Brian, to go after terrorists from obtaining a counterfeit driver's license?
There is, and it is a very tiny part of the Department of Homeland Security, and it was authorized after Congress passed the Real ID Act of 2005, where one of the titles requires the Department of Homeland Security to establish national standards and to so the states have a set of rules, rather complicated rules, that require a lot more security around the process of driver's license issuance. So that the regulations for that came out in 2008, and my organization keeps careful tabs on which states actually comply with it, and the current count is 20 states, and Oregon is far from being among them.
Wow.
So you're one of the laggard states in terms of your local consumption.
You know, we all sense this problem in our culture, but it just seems like it's not being dealt with. It just seems like it's just there. We all know it's there, but if it is so significant, and this is a major loophole in fighting terror, why we can't close this door?
Well, let's revisit terrorism. Let's make sure that your public understands that terrorism is a very subtle business. It's not obvious. It's not like people marching in the streets with placards. It's not like Hollywood contrives it with their movies where guys jump out of helicopters and have armored trucks with, mobs of folks in it, like some of the recent movies. And I think a good example of this is the Oregon case. There's two Oregon cases. One of them was a foreign student who attempted to blow up a parade a few years ago in Portland. You probably remember that. Mm-hmm. And then, but this slips out of people's mind. It's a minor page note, especially if the terrorist was intercepted. The would-be terrorist was intercepted before actually killing anyone. So then it just becomes like a bar fight. If you read it in the newspaper, it doesn't really mean anything.
Right.
But if the terrorist succeeds, like the two in Boston, people are killed, including children and women who are circumstantial victims. And in Boston, I think roughly 30 people had amputated limbs. Mm-hmm. Most of their lives are ruined. Hundreds more were wounded or injured by flying debris or the actual bombs they flew. That Boston Marathon was not long ago. Mm-hmm. Now, in those cases, in those individuals, both those people were legal immigrants, but had successfully appeared to assimilate. And even though they came from a family associated with terrorism in Chechnya, which has now been revealed, and probably the immigration officials knew that, there was no kind of follow-through by the immigration office with Massachusetts, nor would Massachusetts even have the sort of facility to do that. I just read recently that Oregon state legislatures decided they wouldn't fund your Office of Homeland Security that focuses on the issue of terrorism in Oregon, and they were seeking federal grant to do it.
Yeah, believe me,
like
we're
the
well
attitude
aware
of
of
your
that.
citizens, even though just this spring, the feds charged a man named Khan, who runs a store in Portland, with being a major, if not the major, conspirator behind the 2009 suicide bomb attack in Pakistan's intelligence service in Lahore, Pakistan. Killed about 30 people, injured 300 more. He's an upstanding citizen of Portland, I guess.
Whoa. Well,
yeah, I recommend you read it. It was the press release. by the U.S. Attorney's Office in Portland says, Oregon resident charged with conspiring to provide material support, essentially, to the Taliban, Al-Qaeda folks there. So there may be more folks around in Oregon than you know, and you just think there's somebody nice that you can buy some Middle Eastern food from.
Yeah. Brian, so where are you going with this fight, and how can people get involved?
Well, I look at it as a long-term project more than a fight. I wish there was enough Americans were that connected. I think the main thing that we are trying to emphasize is that we seem to, and I'll give you an analogy. We keep having disastrous storms. We keep having special commissions, and yet nobody really gets ready for the next one. Not even Louisiana, or in this case, New Jersey. They're busy feeling sorry for the people that were injured. They're not really taking the proactive steps or raising bonds to build seawalls to stop the next Sandy in New Jersey or New York. It's pathetic. And we're the same way with terrorism, which is, oh, we had that was a long time ago. We feel sorry for all the policemen. What my organization tries to do is to say, you know, there's some fairly low-cost things we can do that really make it difficult for this to happen again. It's not like rising seawaters. We don't have to build large walls. We just have to keep attention to the fact that in this country, the driver's license is an extremely important part of law enforcement and security, including risk from foreign terrorists.
Wow.
That means that states, right now, Oregon spends about a buck or less to make their driver's license.
Mm-hmm.
They spent about $3 a driver's license instead of $1 a driver's license to make the darn thing. It would be pretty much counterfeit proof. You would not see a counterfeit Oregon driver's license that was in any way resembling the real one.
I got to scoot. Thank you, Brian. I appreciate it. Let's stay in touch, and when we can, we'll Skype you back in. But this is fascinating, and I'm sorry that Oregon is just not on top of this, and I'm sure it'll be some issues coming up during this election cycle where this is going to be talked about. Thank you, my friend, and thank you for your work.
Sure, thank you.
Okay, we'll be right back.